What's going on, everybody? This is Brian Mazik, aka Unique Mazik. I am the hardest working man in sports and gaming, and today I'm going to talk to you about what I consider to be the most exciting piece of news, media, however you want to look at it, related to combat sports video games, specifically boxing video games. Steel City Interactive, which is the development studio that is producing Esports Boxing Club, released a video on Friday, or it's Thursday. It was actually Thursday, and it was talking about or showing the latest footage, or at least the latest footage that they've released about Esports Boxing Club. Now, there's some great news here. There's a piece of this that you might consider bad news. So it's a little bit of an up and down kind of a roller coaster I'm going to take you on in case you didn't see the video. And even if you did see the Steel City video, I have some information or perspective that I'm going to give you about this that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. So the video itself was led by Ash Habib, who's the head of the studio at Steel City Interactive, but he did have some assistance from a developer in the studio named Ian, who really talked about the nuts and the bolts of the gameplay, and I'm going to get to that. Now, the video itself is just under 12 minutes, and I highly recommend that you watch the entire thing, because while I'm going to show you some clips and footage and some things to highlight what I'm talking about, I recommend you, especially if you have any appetite, which obviously you do because you're watching this video, if you have any appetite for a boxing video game and learning the details about this upcoming product, you really need to watch this video. But they broke down pretty much 6 different aspects of it, which is movement mechanics, controller layout, evasion, combat and combinations, launch plans for the entire game itself, and the announced new fighter, which you probably already know about. You've probably seen it on this thumbnail, which is Tyson Fury, but more on that later and that whole makeup. So the initial gameplay is featuring Lyndon Arthur and Lawrence Okolie. It looks stunning. So now, if you are a United States or American-based boxing fan, you may not know who Lyndon Arthur and Lawrence Okolie are. They are most of their popularity comes from the UK, but that's actually neither here nor there. It doesn't even matter really, because what you're seeing and what we saw on the screen is really what takes precedence here. The arena, the crowd, and the transparent referee, which is actually going to go away, but it's the way that this was done and when they do it, and I'm going to point this out in a second, but the transparent referee itself is actually going away because they announced in the video that Kenny Bayless, Mr. Floyd, are you okay? Kenny Bayless is going to be the ref in the game moving forward. So that's a cool thing. But one thing about the referee that I really liked here, if you look at it, the referee is present, but he kind of looks like a little bit of a ghost, or he's transparent there when he is in front of the fighters. So this is a really solid way to keep a visual presence of a referee without allowing it to block the action, which is always kind of a conundrum that anybody in combat sports or developing a combat sports video game, they always have. So if you look at EA UFC 4, I don't even know our refs are even in the game at all, because you don't see them during the fight at all. You only see it at the end, or you see it at the beginning of the fight. It's not really there at all. It looks to me that ESBC has come up with a pretty slick way to keep the ref in the game on the screen at all times without having it be an obstruction of what you're actually looking at. The movement is fantastic, and that's because, in my opinion, it screams authentic fighter movement. There's this appropriate skip and fluidity that I really haven't seen in any other combat sports title in the past at all. And trust me, I have played, I think, all of them. I can't think of a boxing game or a mixed martial arts game that I have not played, and we're talking about going back decades, right? I have never seen movement quite like this. It's almost like, and I really don't want to oversell this because I haven't played the game yet, but some of the stuff that I used to write in wish lists for years on Bleacher Report, on Forbes, on Heavy.com, talking about the way I thought fighter movement should work in a boxing game, it's looking like they were like reading my notes or something. So I'm pretty excited about that aspect. Now, the controller map, which they show on the screen, reveals users, how pretty much every button that you push to do everything in the game. If you did play Fight Night Champion and you're looking at this controller map, you know that this is very similar, if not identical, to Fight Night Champion, which had pretty much these same options. So you can throw punches with the buttons, or you can throw with right stick or analog controls, and they call it total punch control. Very, very similar to what most of us who played a ton of Fight Night got used to. And quite honestly, from a control standpoint, I don't think punching really needed to be changed. So kudos to Steel City for not feeling the need to change something that didn't really need to be changed. Now, that doesn't mean that punching and everything in that order works exactly as it did with Fight Night Champion. We're going to get into that for a second. But as I said, the very similar with the button mapping, such as the power punch modifiers assigned to the bumpers, with the all-important block button assigned to the right trigger, while weaving is ignited with the left trigger. I'm going to talk about that as well in a second. I also love that there are two different movement types, loose and generic movement. The movement actually is going to be pressure sensitive, meaning that your fighter can take like quick and short steps in any direction with a flick of the left analog stick, but a more deliberate move in that direction if you hold the stick down, which kind of marches forward, and as the momentum is gained up, you're moving in that direction faster. But it looks to be a pretty natural sense of momentum. You can't shift directions unnaturally. It takes a second for the human body to adjust and move left and right. Obviously, some athletes have better quick twitch athleticism and they're able to be more agile in that area. Now, we're going to talk about that when we get into the ratings that we saw, which really had me excited, prompted me to ask Steel City a question, which I'm still waiting on the answer to, but once I get it, I'll get back to you with that. But I'm getting ahead of myself because there's a lot of good stuff to talk about here. Again, like I said, the video looked phenomenal in regards to movement, and I can't wait to get my hands on the game so I can get a feel for it myself. Now, the loose movement thing is kind of like a hybrid between taunting and actual tactical movement, which for me is an ingenious inclusion because of how important that sort of thing is to combat sports, but specifically to the sweet science, incorporating signature movement with counters and slips, especially since the mechanic doesn't function like a taunt does in EA UFC, which can get you knocked out while you deal with the cooldown moment that comes anytime you taunt. It's a little bit longer depending on which taunt you use, but if you play EA UFC, you know what I mean. But this whole thing in ESBC can be mixed in to create kind of like a funkier style. And I love that. I really do. The dodging of punches, that mechanic, it has a beautiful kind of like risk reward component, as we see in some of that exciting footage of Arthur being stunned after he mistimed the weave. The on-screen effect of him being stunned, if I had a critique at all, I would have said maybe slightly his facial expression should have changed. And I was watching it with my son, who's a humongous boxing fan. He made the suggestion, and I'm going to actually pass this on to Steel City. It would be cool if at some time, if you've watched MMA, if you watch boxing, you've seen a fighter get stunned and then they kind of get this nervous grin on their face to kind of like hint and say, oh, that didn't hurt me. But it's always a dead giveaway. Anytime you get that smile, you know that dude got stunned. I don't want to see that every time a fighter gets stunned, but having that as a potential thing that happens when a guy gets lit up, that would be pretty nice, as it was as I saw it. And who knows, maybe that's in it and we just didn't see that. But from what we saw in the video, Lyndon Arthur's facial expression didn't really change to one that looks like a guy that was stunned. But I'm really, at this point, I'm pointing out small nicks on the body of a Rolls Royce at this point, because I didn't see anything that was a major issue. But for me, like I said, and you can probably tell by my level of excitement and the way that I'm talking about this, is that it's by far the most impressive boxing video game footage that we've ever seen. The facial expressions during punches and during like when there's exchanges, the player grunts that you can hear, and like I said, I encourage you to watch the video. You won't be able to hear it here as you know I'm talking and have the background music going, but The facial expressions and the player grunts during the slugging is also a really strong touch. In one particular segment, and you'll see this here, Okolie demonstrates a rope-a-dope style, which shows the whole stamina element and how that impacts gameplay. Let me tell you something. Do you know how long I have wanted a combat sports game to have this sort of allow your opponent to tire themselves out kind of a mechanic? I mean, in EA UFC, if you got a guy who keeps going for a bunch of humongous strikes and uppercuts and flying knees and stuff like that, yeah, their stamina will start to go down, but it doesn't go down in anything that's close to like a realistic pace. And I'm not like crapping on EA UFC. I play that game quite a bit, but I've had to accept it for what it is, which is not a straight simulation of mixed martial arts. It's more of a fighting game with mixed martial arts characters and a tad bit more realism, or more realism than a fantasy fighting game, but it serves the purpose for what it is. It's the best combat sports game available right now, but this seems to take things to a whole nother level. That stamina element is ridiculous. There's also a difference between weaving and slipping that in itself is just dope, right? The latter is, of course, the quickest, and you can see some of the differences in the video. The weaving is, far more, demonstrative, and the slipping is exactly what it should be. It's the subtle movements that just barely make a punch miss, and it puts you in a better position to throw a counter shot. Think about somebody like Roy Jones Jr. or Floyd Mayweather, guys with great defensive instincts. Their ability to slip punches and counter is a big part of what has made them, or what made them such great fighters throughout their careers. And to be able to implement that sort of an element in the game is not something that we've seen in a combat sports game. I mean, Fight Night Round 3 had like parries, right? You could parry a guy, and you could kind of slip in Fight Night Champion, but it didn't really look like this looks. And again, I caution you, I haven't played the game, so I'm going by what I'm seeing on the screen and the breakdown, which is clearly coming from people who understand boxing. You can hear the way that they discuss the gameplay mechanics, that these are not just some guys who said, you know what, it would make a lot of money if we had a boxing game. Nobody's had one in a while. Now, these are people who you can tell love boxing, and I'm just really over the moon for what this is right now. The video, it also talked about blocking. There's 2 different block settings. You can do manual, which has you block 1 of 3 potential hit areas, and they kind of demonstrate that with Arthur. And there's some different, it looks like there's some different blocking styles. I do recall another video talking about different blocking styles and how that your different blocking styles would impact the way your defense worked, because some blocking styles block certain, there's risk reward and there's pros and cons to the different blocking styles, and they're going to actually make sure that that's in gameplay. That's a beautiful concept in itself. But then there is a more arcade based blocking style, which just has you block either your head or your body. I can tell a lot of hardcore people would probably frown upon that approach. At the end of the day, it's going to be about the one that you have the most fun with. But yeah, pro style people are going to want to use the manual blocking so they can have control. And what I would expect, and we didn't necessarily hear this in the video, but I would expect for Steel City to implement some element where you have a little bit of an advantage if you use manual blocking over the assisted blocking method. So we'll see. But you can also, this is huge. This is huge. You can also punch while blocking. Now, your punches aren't as powerful, but this is a mechanic that I cannot remember seeing in a combat sports game, that you can punch while blocking. Now, you can only throw jabs or straights out of this stance or when you are blocking, but to be able to do it is really nice. Now, the one thing I did not see, and I still haven't seen, and I think this is probably one of the hardest things to implement in a combat sports game, is infighting. Punching while holding, that whole aspect of boxing that we all know is a huge part of the sport. I haven't seen that, and I don't know if there's going to be an element of that. As I'm going through this voiceover, I'm thinking of other questions I need to forward to Steel City. But is there an element of infighting in the game? Now, Fight Night Champion didn't have it at all. Now, I will give EA UFC some credit there because there is some stuff that happens in the clinch. You know, it could be a little bit better, but it's there. And I'm wondering if that's something that esports boxing will add down the line or what. But I can imagine that would be a very difficult gameplay mechanic to implement. Now, going back to punching, though, each fighter is going to have 42 different punch types. There's combinations, and those combinations are essentially a mixture of all of those different punch types. The combinations in the video, they look slick, fluid, and I can just imagine that there's a huge like personal payoff when you set up a nice combination. Don't let it be a 4-punch. Oh, the 4 punches are the best. You set up a 4-punch combination and that joint lands, all 4 of them land clean, or 2 or 3 of them land clean. That's gotta feel good. If this game feels the way it looks, that's gotta feel good. Now, flash knockdowns and one-punch KOs, they are also a part of the game. I love it. A lot of non-hardcore boxing people are going to hate the fact that they're going to lose on one shot. But those of us who understand that that element is essential in any authentic boxing or MMA game, they really should appreciate the inclusion. The difference between combat sports and every other sport, the biggest difference is you can be dominating an entire match and lose because you made one mistake. There really isn't another sport where that's the case. You know, like you can say I was controlling the match in soccer, but you can't lose on one mistake unless you were only winning 1-0. You know, if you were up 3-0, 4-0, one mistake's not going to kill you. Same thing in baseball. The only way your pitcher may have been dominating, but your hitting wasn't dominating because you only had 1 run or what have you. So one mistake, like you can literally be dominating in MMA or boxing, but one mistake will get you knocked out and you lost. That element needs to be in a game for it to be effective, and that is in ESBC, and I'm excited about that. The mechanic has to be right though. So there is some areas where that could be cheese, and if there is an issue at launch with that, I would expect they probably have to come in and do something to change that. But just the fact that it's in there is something I'm excited to see. Now, there are, like I said, 42 different punch types, but all of the fighters throw those shots differently. So it appears that the different fighters, maybe, or someone that was a stand-in, motion captured all of these different punches so they don't look the same. So a Coley's jab and right cross combination look different than somebody else's jab and right cross combination. It looked different than the ones we saw from Lyndon Arthur in the video. So because there's a different type of punch to every fighter, each boxer has something of a move set, if you will. Now, when you create a boxer, according to the video, you can mix and match the punches that are already in the game. So you're literally creating like your own kind of move set for your created fighter as well, which I love. Ash did come back toward the end of the video to discuss the fighter's ability to be dangerous when they are hurt. If you've watched boxing, you know. If you watch mixed martial arts, you know. Sometimes a fighter can be dazed or hurt, and if his opponent runs or if her opponent rushes in without protecting themselves, they can get lit up and get knocked out. We've seen it happen. Anthony Joshua against Vladimir Klitschko. He had just hurt Klitschko. Kind of did an energy dump trying to get him out and got knocked down himself later in the fight. Didn't ultimately end up winning, but he got caught in a situation at that point. We've seen it happen with plenty of other fights where somebody came in after they thought they had somebody finished or close to finished and got caught themselves. So the video segment shows a Coley catching an over-eager Lyndon Arthur coming in recklessly and gets dropped. It was beautiful. From there, we saw the career stats page, which blew my mind. But like I said, I'm going to check with them. I'm going to check with Steel City to make sure about this. But those career stats and the attribute page showed off an insane amount of fighter attributes. Just take a look at this. We got head and body health, general health. I'm not sure the difference or what that comes down to, but health regeneration, health recovery, injury resistance, stamina regeneration, stamina recovery, conditioning, endurance, agility, move speed, punch speed, accuracy, chin resistance, body resistance, cut resistance, bruise. I've never seen bruise resistance or any element about bruising in a combat sports game. Blocking, they have power ratings for both hands. Beautiful. Left and right hand power, jab modifier, uppercut modifier, hook modifier, straight modifier, and then we have KO power. So that's, I'm assuming, the ability to drop and knock somebody out with one shot, which is definitely different than seemingly just punishing somebody and getting them out of there. To give you an example, Gennady Golovkin has never really been a one-punch knockout guy. Sure, he's knocked out some people with shots like that, but generally, the way he finishes guys or has finished guys in his career is with thudding punches that take their toll over the course of rounds. Then you got people who are just electric punchers who knock people out with one shot. Mike Tyson, Julian Jackson. We're talking about people who all I need is one, and it's time to go to sleep. So I would assume that KO power is related to fighters with that level, or that's an attribute where they would excel. There's also discipline, courage, and confidence. Now, these were specific to career mode. So one of my questions to Steel City is, those particular attributes, will every fighter in the game have ratings in those categories? Or is this specific to career mode? So once I get an answer to that, I'll be back to give you what I was told. But there's just so much here that I've never seen touched before in a combat sports game. You tell me if you've ever seen bruise resistance in a combat sports game, courage and confidence, and stamina recovery and health regeneration. A lot of this stuff is just innovative and new, and I'm hoping that it comes together. So all of that led to an interactive career hub that they didn't show much of, but we see a fighter walking into a gym and it looks like he's setting up to do like some sort of mini game or some sort of training game that is designed to help you level up your fighter, maintain, or build new attributes. I'm assuming we'll see more of that in the coming months. One unanswered questions, like I said, I really want to find this out, is, are the licensed fighters and your creative fighters going to be judged on those same ratings? So we'll see. I'll ask about that, of course. Now, the major announcement, as most everybody knows at this point, is Tyson Fury's in the game. Now, I've expected this for a while, to be honest. I wasn't surprised when I saw it at all. The player model looked great, and I can't wait to see him actually in action in the game. And I'm going to go out on a limb right now, and I'm going to say, I know everybody thinks that Canelo's the cover guy, but I'm thinking Tyson Fury and Canelo might end up on the cover of this game. Maybe more fighters than just that. So I have a feeling that Tyson Fury is not just in this game to just be a part of the roster. So this opens up a whole nother topic, right? And this is kind of what I meant when I said that I had some different perspective to offer on this particular situation. ESBC is getting bigger investors on board. They say that, Ash says that in the video, and I happen to know that for a fact myself. Even more assets are being added to make this game a bigger project than it ever was when it first started. I'm going to tell y'all right now, I don't believe that they are done adding major names to this roster. We've seen enough in this video alone to deliver some legitimate excitement about the game, even above what we'd seen before, right? So we've seen some cool stuff before, but this is different. This is different, right? This is a little bit more. I don't believe this game is going to release before the first quarter of 2022. Ash says in the video that planned summer early access thing that they were going to do, and they're not doing that anymore. And I'm going to tell you why that is. A lot of people might be like, well, why in the world aren't they doing that? It's because at this point, this project has become so big and they have so much money behind it, and they likely have a humongous organization probably behind them at this point, that if you think about it, When is the last time you saw an EA, a 2K, or a Sony game do an early access period on a game? Like, you don't see the major publishers put a game out like that. You know, that's more of something that happens from a smaller indie studio, which Steel City still is. But this move to dump the early access summer thing is not a bad thing overall. Now, it's a bad thing for those of us who really want to play this game and like, man, it's been a long time since a boxing game came out. But in the grand scheme of things, this is not a bad look. This means that the project has gotten bigger and it has essentially outgrown an early access period. That is one thing that you have to understand. I don't expect by the time this game comes out that it's going to be lacking many, if any, major names. And at this point, the entire project has leveled up. People and, you know, boxing fans finally actually have something to be optimistic about when it comes to a boxing video game. I'm fired up. I don't even care about hiding my emotions for it. I will be very much let down if this game sucks. I will be very much let down if it doesn't come out at all. So if you're wondering, yep, that's the answer to that. But at this point, man, I'm getting more and more in the camp of this is going to be a pretty solid boxing video game. One that pretty much exceeds what I would say was most of our expectations when we were just hoping that somebody would just blow on the option of having a boxing video game. That's all I got for you guys today. I appreciate you watching as always. Don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe. God bless and peace.